Picture this. It's the dead of winter, 1872. You're sitting in a gaslit London parlor, and the heavy curtains are drawn completely shut. The last candle is snuffed out. Now, you're sitting shoulder to shoulder with grieving strangers in pitch blackness, your fingertips barely grazing the edge of a mahogany table. And then, a pale, luminous shape actually begins to rise from the floor right in front of you. You're about to witness one of the most sophisticated, devastating, and frankly, heartbreaking psychological illusions in human history. Welcome to this explainer on the Victorian Ghost Factory. Okay, let's plunge right back into that exact room. Across the table sits a decorated, highly educated scientist. Now, this isn't a gullible guy, right? He demands evidence for everything. Yet, as that glowing, fog-like shape hovers near him, he reaches out his hand in the dark, and something reaches back. He literally feels cold, damp fingers press against his palm. He's going to write in his diary that very night that what he just experienced completely shatters everything he knows about biology and physics. He truly believed with every fiber of his being that he had just made physical contact with the spirit world. He thought he was touching ectoplasm, that mystical substance that supposedly bridged the gap between the living and the dead. But the reality of what he actually touched in that darkness, it is almost too absurd to believe. Part 1. The Hand in the Dark, Exposing the Ghost Factory. What that brilliant scientist experienced wasn't spirits at all. It was an absolute masterpiece of theatrical deception. It was an entire industry built on the deepest vulnerabilities of the human heart, where grief was basically weaponized as a highly profitable commodity. That ghost rising from the floor, it was literally just a piece of common cheesecloth, soaked in egg white to make it look all gelatinous and smuggled inside a medium's clothing. And those cold, damp fingers from the great beyond, a rubber glove stretched over a wire frame. It was a cheap parlor trick, but one that was elevated to an absolute art form. Moving to part 2, the Fox sisters' toe tricks and the birth of American grief. So to understand how an entire global society fell for this, we actually have to trace the origins of this paranormal gold rush back to a freezing New York farmhouse. The year is 1848. Two teenage girls, Margaret and Kate Fox, start claiming they're communicating with the ghost of a murdered salesman buried under their cellar. They'd ask the spirit a question out loud, and these mysterious knocks would suddenly echo from the floorboards. It sparked a massive, worldwide movement called spiritualism. But decades later, Margaret confessed the wild irony of the whole thing. The girls were simply cracking the joints of their toes against the wood. Think about that for a second. Two teenagers accidentally changed the world with a physical party trick. But here's where we really need to pause and look at the real context. Why on earth did a supposedly rational, modernizing society desperately want to believe in toe-cracking teenagers? Well, it wasn't stupidity. It was trauma. The American Civil War left 620,000 men dead. That is a staggering, unbearable scale of loss. So many families received no bodies, no final words, no goodbyes at all. Their desperate hunger for any kind of proof that their loved ones still existed somewhere made them the absolute, perfect, willing audience for these tricks. And sadly, this relentless wave of mass death just continued right into the 20th century. 9 million soldiers perished in the First World War. This created a second massive surge in the ghost factory's business. And it was so powerful that it completely consumed some of the most brilliant minds of the era, including Arthur Conan Doyle, the famous creator of Sherlock Holmes. The very man who invented fiction's greatest, most rational detective became a devout evangelical believer in séances after losing his own son to the war. The grief was simply too heavy for logic to carry. Which brings us to part 3, the mechanics of fraud. Cheesecloth and magazine faces. As the decades passed, simple toe-knocking just wasn't going to cut it anymore. Audiences wanted to see the dead. They wanted to touch them. Take the totally wild case of Eva Carrier. She was this famous medium in Paris who claimed to actually produce ectoplasm from her mouth, complete with the faces of the dead embedded right in it. While skeptical investigator Harry Price meticulously examined the grainy photographs of her séances, and what he discovered is mind-blowing. The spirit faces matched point for point the faces of politicians and celebrities printed in a popular French tabloid called Le Miroir. She was literally chewing up magazine clippings and unfolding them in the dark amidst damp gauze. This kind of stuff was the standard toolkit of the Victorian ghost factories. And honestly, the absolute most crucial tool they had was pitch darkness. Mediums claimed that light physically damaged the spirits, but let's be real, it just hid the props. They used hollow tables equipped with secret foot pedals to make them levitate. They hid damp cheesecloth inside fake hair pieces, or even swallowed it. They kept those rubber gloves tucked away tight to stay warm against their own skin, so that when a sitter was touched in the dark, it genuinely felt like living, yet somehow unnatural flesh.
Part 4. Houdini versus the Ghost Factory. The Great Unraveling.
Eventually, the ghost factory ran into a brick wall, and his name was Harry Houdini. Because he was a master illusionist himself, he knew exactly how these tricks were constructed. It's like a magician watching another magician. He actually began attending séances in disguise, sitting quietly in the dark, just waiting for the exact split second the medium slipped a hand free from her restraints or reached for a hidden prop. He basically became a one-man wrecking ball, publicly exposing the most famous and lucrative mediums in the world.
But here is a truly fascinating Easter egg about this whole era. For all of his aggressive debunking, Houdini still harbored a secret, desperate hope for the afterlife himself. Before he died, he made a pact with his wife, Bess. He gave her a highly classified coded message and told her that if it was truly possible to bridge the gap, he'd send that exact code from beyond the grave. Every single Halloween, for 10 years after he died, Bess held a séance, waiting for his code. It never came.
The real unraveling of the ghost factory happened when scientific investigators finally stopped playing by the medium's rules. They dragged them out of those cozy, dark parlors and straight into the laboratory. Suddenly, the investigators controlled the lights. They conducted full-body medical searches before the sessions to find hidden cheesecloth. And they brought out the ultimate weapon, invisible infrared photography. Mediums thought they were operating in total, safe darkness, completely unaware that special cameras were snapping crystal-clear photos of them yanking props right out from under their chairs. Caught red-handed. Part 5. The Psychology of Belief. Inside the Darkened Room. So, the cheesecloth was totally exposed, right? But why did so many people still flat-out refuse to accept the proof? Well, it brilliantly comes down to something called the ideomotor effect. In a lot of these seances, no one was actually faking it. Seriously. When grieving people sit around a table intensely expecting it to move, their bodies create minute involuntary muscle contractions. Distributed across many hands, the table genuinely begins to slide or tilt, all on its own. To honest, hurting people, you can see why the experience felt entirely supernatural. You don't even realize you're doing it. The crucial takeaway here is that putting an intelligent person in a pitch-black room, totally deprived of their senses, and surrounded by weeping strangers completely short-circuits their normal logic. Think about it. If you're the one skeptic sitting in that circle, and the mother right next to you is crying tears of joy because she thinks her dead son is touching her shoulder, are you really going to be the guy who turns on the lights and yells, "Hey, it's just a rubber glove"? The social cost of ruining that profound moment of comfort was just too high, so people stayed silent, and the myth grew. Finally, Part 6. The Unanswered Human Question and What the Fraud Left Behind. The Victorian Séance was eventually dismantled by science, but it left behind a profoundly complicated legacy. Just look at the deeply intertwined fates of the people caught in this web. Margaret Fox, the teenager whose toes started it all, died in poverty, her reputation ruined by her own confession. Houdini died on Halloween. Conan Doyle went to his grave absolutely 100% convinced the spirits were real. And in 1936, Bess Houdini finally turned off the light she kept burning for Harry. This fraud permanently entangled all of their lives. So, the ghost factory was packed away, the cheesecloth was proven fake, the rubber gloves were confiscated. But exposing the trick never actually cured the grief, did it? The investigators proved exactly how the fraud worked mechanically, but they couldn't answer the desperate human question that drove people into those dark rooms in the first place. What happens when the people we love are gone? The Victorian parlor might be empty now, but that core question still haunts us today. When the lights go out, what are you hoping is waiting for you in the dark?